Today's video is brought to you by Campfire, our first sponsor. I'm feeling very excited that we actually are real YouTubers now and we have a sponsor. I broke my arm when I was in 5th grade. I was swinging on the monkey bars at recess and slipped, falling to quite spectacular, depending on your perspective, results. The experience taught me two things. First off, going outside is far more dangerous than doing the sensible thing and just sitting around reading books. Second, if you break your arm, you get a transformer. Note, your results may vary depending on circumstances, age, and whether or not your father is Win Sanderson. In my case, to help me feel better after a pretty frightful day, my father took me, newly becasted, to browse the toy store. I ended up with Jetfire, an excellent transformer that was totally not just a rip-off of a Robotech design. The transformer remained my favorite all through my childhood and youth. It felt so solid, so imposing compared to my others. Plus, any transformer who didn't pick a jet to turn into was suspect in my eyes. I mean, cars are cool and all, but why would you choose not to be able to fly? It's baffling. All my favorites, save one, were flying machines. The lone exception was Bumblebee. There was something delightful about that little garish punch bug. All the others were cool or imposing in some way, but then there was Bumblebee. Small, rotund, so brightly painted he might as well have had a target on him. He was lovable because he looked so out of place compared to the others. I know I wasn't the only one who felt this affection. Bumblebee is the Samwise Gamgee of the giant mecha shows. He might want to save the world, but first he wants second breakfast. So, like many others, I was interested when the Bumblebee movie was announced. It's the first thing that moved my interest style on the franchise since the first movie was announced, and that was only because it was bringing Peter Cullen back, the original voice of Optimus Prime. I should have been the target demographic for the Transformers movies, but the first one didn't do it for me. Too much chaos on screen, clunky, cringeworthy humor, paper-thin characters. I know much of this could be said about the old television show, but I'm not 7 years old anymore. When the second film was worse by report than the already low bar set by the first, I decided to stop going. I'm not particularly offended by these movies, mind you. Others have done an excellent analysis on what's wrong with them, but at the same time, tons of other people love them. This wasn't an example of films in a beloved franchise being so bad it bothered me, like some other certain unmentionable films. It was brain candy that didn't have the right flavor for me. So I just went on with my life, barely paying attention. So even though the idea of a Bumblebee movie interested me, I didn't go see it. Even a much welcome change in directors didn't tempt me quite enough. I don't love prequels as a rule, and I wasn't really looking for another overwrought action movie that would treat my eyes like a mechanical bull treats drunk bar patrons. But then the reviews came in, and I perked up. At this point, the Bumblebee film is widely considered to be the only good live-action Transformers film. So it went on my list of things to someday watch. And pandemic isolation and lack of film releases had me digging through said lists with regularity. I can now say I agree with the assessment. Bumblebee isn't a fantastic film, for reasons I want to talk about in this essay. But I enjoyed it a great deal. It had charm, something absolutely lacking in the previous entry I'd seen. The lead actress was great. The action scenes didn't seem like they were trying to test me for epileptic inclinations. There were characters with personalities that went beyond, this is the robot who speaks jive. In particular, I like some of the smaller touches. Old school robot designs, a great soundtrack, 80s aesthetic without turning it into a massive reference fest, a small-scale story about a very large-scale creature. All in all, it's neat, and I recommend it. But it gives us something really interesting to talk about, because this movie is a great example at how to fail at writing a character arc. Or maybe two. This isn't a destructive flaw to the film. The charm is the real selling point, and good acting and relatable characters are far more important than actual narrative arcs. But the failure here prevents the film, in my mind, from being great. And so, I'd like to do a script notes for this specific part of the film, talking through the feedback I'd give if I had been asked to review the shooting script before the film was made. And now a quick message from our sponsor, Campfire. More than 150,000 writers use Campfire to organize, improve, and showcase their writing. Organize your stories in Campfire Write with over a dozen modules like character sheets, timelines, relationship webs, and a manuscript editor that lets you reference your notes while you write. Everything you create is private, safely stored in the cloud, and shareable to collaborate with friends. Improve your craft with Campfire Learn, their hub of educational resources. Showcase your projects in Campfire Explore to share your work with the community and build a following. Choose what parts of your project to share and craft a homepage to present your story. Create an account for free and enjoy access to everything from the start. If you're working on bigger projects in Campfire Write, you only have to pay for the features you need. Start a subscription for as low as 25 cents a month or pay a one-time price with Campfire a la carte options. Plus, Campfire just released their offline desktop app with even more updates on the way, like new modules, a mobile app, and the ability to monetize your writing in Explore. Write better stories faster with Campfire. Click the link in the description to learn more. Why character arcs? So, stories at their core are about change. Conflict is introduced, and the characters somehow overcome or fail to overcome that conflict. A lot of great stories play with a circular structure, ending either metaphorically or literally where they began. Indeed, many characters fight an entire story to make sure something doesn't happen. The bomb won't go off. The apocalypse won't happen. The fight is for the status quo. To an extent, this is what is happening in Bumblebee. The fight is to make certain that Earth doesn't end up getting taken over by a group of maniacal toasters. The plot isn't about the world changing then, but about what happens to the characters as they prevent it from changing. Character arcs serve several functions. First, they're fun. Seeing people grow is interesting, and I never want to discount the pure fun of a great story well told. Second, they provide motion. Great stories always have a momentum to them. Something is changing, and during slower moments of introspection, we can watch that momentum transforming a person into someone better or someone worse, depending. Finally, arcs allow us, through watching characters as audience surrogates, to experience strong emotions. We see people overcome, grow, and this is inspiring. When done well, it is the single most satisfying thing that one can experience in a story. Growth and change from a character make the story worth it, in a sense. We see the effect on the character, and we feel our time was well spent watching or reading this story. There's a satisfaction to a well-done character arc. The protagonist of the Bumblebee film is not the robot himself, though he's an important character. The story is wisely told through the eyes of Charlie, a teenage girl whose life changes when she finds that the broken-down VW Beetle she's just purchased was actually a giant amnesiac alien robot. For Bumblebee himself, we have a very simple amnesia plot. He was sent to scout a safe place for the other Transformers. However, when he landed on Earth, he had to end up fighting some evil robots. He won, but was wounded/broken in a way that cost him his memories. We see a shot of his memory core going offline in the film, and when we next meet him, he has lost all recollection of who he was and why he came to Earth. Though I called this plot simple, it can be a very effective and interesting storytelling device, so long as the writer understands that it can also come off very goofy if not managed well. In this case, we have a perfect explanation for it. He's a robot, so his memory getting corrupted is reasonable. These sorts of plots usually play out as some kind of external conflict for the character, but as proven in the Bourne Identity, probably the best version of this plot archetype I've seen, you can work in some solid internal conflicts as well if you do it right. The primary character arc to the film, however, is ostensibly that of Charlie. She's lost her father sometime in recent years, a man with whom she had a strong bond. Her mother is dating someone new, who is presented in a sympathetic light, but Charlie is shown to be hung up on her loss, unable to move forward. Again, this is a straightforward but effective type of character arc. Perfectly reasonable, and it was well matched to an actor who could play it with the subtlety and the heart that it needed to work. So what's the problem? Well, there's a bunch of them here. But the most visible one is that the creators of the movie couldn't decide how Charlie's loss would manifest. In a long-form drama, you might have time to focus on the loss itself and make it the core of the story. However, most of the time, the stories we're telling in a film like this are going to involve action beats, exploration beats, romance beats, and a kind of popular narrative style of storytelling. That doesn't mean you can't do serious character drama in an action-adventure film, but usually you need to give some strong outward indications and reinforcements of the inward drama. Secondly, and perhaps more important, this kind of plot, getting over grief, is usually stronger if we can see the negative effects on the character's life. Overcoming the character's internal problem should be tied to some external problem in their life that this pain or conflict is preventing them from overcoming. It's not just that a character is still grieving for someone they lost. It's that they're grieving so hard they don't pay attention to the people that are still alive who need them. It's not just that a character is greedy and wants his money. It's that when he runs off with it, he leaves his friends to face an evil Death Star alone. This kind of film really needs a strong visual way to indicate to the viewer how the character's conflict is manifesting outwardly and why it's bad for them to keep fixating on it. The writers of Bumblebee knew this because they gave Charlie not one, but two visible manifestations of her grief. On one hand, Charlie is a mechanic. She worked with her father on repairing an old hot rod. She is handy with tools. One of the very best moments in the film, perhaps my favorite character establishing moment from any movie I've seen recently, is the one where Charlie goes into the junkyard. A guy working on a car there asks her for a wrench, and she absently hands him a different one on purpose. For, as he soon realizes, that wrench is the one he actually needs. He's misjudged. This tells us so much about Charlie in such an economical way. She's able to look at the situation, judge, and problem-solve a mechanical issue in seconds, where a presumed expert made a mistake. She's confident enough in herself to give him what she knows he'll need, even when he might snap at her for being wrong. She is confident and capable in this realm, and she has earned it. We know of her past with her father. We see her working on junk. We know that this is part of her character. This is a well-developed attribute and a representation of her grief. After all, as the film makes clear, she has this irrational feeling that if she fixes the hot rod she was working on with her father, she'll somehow make everything okay with his passing. And then the film just refuses to use this. She meets up with a broken robot in need of a literal mechanic, and after some brief and inconsequential mechanical talk, her talent is never brought up again. At a later point in the film, Bumblebee is even laying on the ground unconscious, presumably dead. And I kid you not, they just have her use jumper cables to shock him back to life like she's giving him CPR. The character that they painstakingly reinforced as being a mechanical genius grabs a couple random wires and with no foreshadowing or indication at all that this would be effective, rams them into the fallen robot. And bing! That magically fixes him. Her proven talent with machines is never relevant to the film. At the end, she's fixed her father's car, which is a good way to give us some small payoff to the earlier promises. But otherwise, this aspect of her character is completely ignored. So what do they do instead? Well, Charlie can dive really well. For some reason, in this film about a mechanic, the central thematic moment of her emotional arc is a point where she is willing to dive off of a platform. Earlier in the film, it is revealed that she used to love competitive diving and had won awards for it. She has a moment of reinforcement in the film when mean girls are making fun of her and she has a chance to go cliff diving, but she chooses not to. Then, at the end of the film, through a series of laughable contrivances, she's given the opportunity to dive into a flooded section of an industrial park. Not because anyone's in danger, mind you. Not to save anyone or accomplish something. After the bad guys are defeated, she dives in to give Bumblebee a hug. Basically, her character arc in the film amounts to this. She, at the end, is finally willing to jump into the water so she doesn't have to wait for Bumblebee to get out. I will note that in the logic of the film, she doesn't know if Bumblebee is alive or not, and so she might have been thinking that she needs to reach him quickly in case he needs help. Joking aside, there are some good things about this character arc. Unlike the mechanic arc, it is showing that her grief is negatively impacting her life. She no longer does something she used to love. Not sure why. Maybe she used to share diving with her father? I really don't know. The mother says, "Why don't you do that anymore?" And Charlie's anxious when a video of her diving comes up, as it has her father in it. So the subtext is that she's pained by memories of her father when diving and so has to give it up? But there are some serious problems here. First off, it has nothing to do with the rest of the story, as evidenced by how hard they had to work to contrive a way for it to even be slightly relevant at the end of the story. Now, on its own, I could forgive this. You can have character arcs that run parallel instead of perpendicular to the rest of the story. But there's also a lot of nuance that is flat out missing here. Why has this quest with a robot made her forget the pain of being with her father enough that she dives now? We see no indication that this diving pain is soothed somehow by events in the story. We don't see that there's a hang-up she's worked through or some growth arc she's overcome. She doesn't dive, then suddenly she does. This isn't an arc so much as a sudden right turn, albeit one where the blinker was flashing to let us know it was coming. The greater problem here is one of character agency. Why is it a bad thing that she no longer dives? Charlie doesn't show any interest. All the indications that she should do more diving come from her mother and from the mean girl's peer pressure, neither of which are internal sources of desire. In essence, this plot is trying to bully Charlie into doing something she no longer seems to love in order to satisfy other people. To make it work, we really needed indication that Charlie herself missed diving. And yet, her triumphant dive at the end doesn't say, "Yay, she's grown," but rather, "Oh great, peer pressure was right. She isn't allowed to move on to other things in her life, but has to do what everyone else says she should enjoy." This is why it's bad that they split the manifestation of her arc across two themes. It's all right in a film to have an arc manifest in multiple ways, but not when you're going to split it in half, then make neither one satisfying. Being a mechanic relates to her father, but her pain there doesn't really seem to hamper her in any way. Giving up diving seems to hamper her, but is completely disconnected from the main plot and doesn't even seem to be something she cares about anyway. Moving on to Bumblebee. He is handled in a similarly awkward way. There's some really fun fish out of water memory loss type storytelling here. It would have been far more poignant if it hadn't felt like every beat had been done better by the Iron Giant. Now, comparisons are really hard to avoid, but I don't think a film should avoid doing something just because it has been done well in the past, particularly by one of the best movies of all time. But it feels like the makers of this show had seen the Iron Giant and wanted to use the Cliff Notes version of that story. Bumblebee has trouble communicating. Yes, I know this is set up in the other films, so it was essential. Just like the Iron Giant. Junkyards are relevant, just like in the Iron Giant. There's an over-the-top military type chasing the secret robot, just like in the Iron Giant. I mean, none of these things are out of place in a film about a robot like this, so I probably wouldn't have even mentioned it except for one scene. After Bumblebee gets reverse electrocuted, hey, it works on people, so of course it will work on a mechanical being. He has a moment where his eyes turn red and he engages super death mode. Then he blows up a bunch of human soldiers. Why? Why is this in the film? Bumblebee is shown at the beginning actively risking his life to protect humans who are trying to kill him. His entire quest is about protecting and helping. There isn't a single piece of foreshadowing or a character beat anywhere that indicates he has a dangerous side to him. This is Bumblebee, all right? And then he just goes crazy for a moment. After he gets his memory back for reasons? Feels like someone watched another movie, that I don't need to bring up or mention at all, and thought they needed this beat in their film because it was there. Remember, folks, plot skeletons and archetypes are guidelines. If you put something in your story just because it's in other stories like this, not because it's meaningful for your specific story, you're going to end up with things like the virgin birth in a Star Wars film. You do not want to end up like the Star Wars prequel films. In this case, this character element for Bumblebee is pointless, and kind of even makes us stop rooting for him for a little while. Our lovable yellow puppy has just totally killed some dudes who are being manipulated by the evil robots. Again, just why? Why is this in the movie? Anyway, the rest of the story plays out without a ton of drama. He gets his memories back, beats up the enemy robots, falls in the water, dive scene happens. His plot is mostly external, like I said earlier. He loses his memories, something needs to restore them, then, as proven in the beginning, he will be a hyper-competent super robot and stop the bad guys. Now, stopping the bad guys isn't the important moment. Getting his memories back is. Without them, he doesn't have his awesome fighting abilities, which is why it's so counterproductive. The moment he gets him back is, instead of being triumphant, really strange and kind of awful. This essay is already too long, so I'm not going to go into John Cena's character or the entire arc with the military. Basically, John Cena is Javert, only instead of jumping off a bridge at the end, he watches Charlie do it. He relentlessly pursues Bumblebee, despite being told early on, and kind of having proven that Bumblebee is a good guy. Okay, I lied. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Because what is the point of the entire sequence with the military? If you haven't seen the film, John Cena and company are searching for Bumblebee, but run into two evil robots, who, for some reason, they don't immediately attack, despite having gone Rambo on Bumblebee the moment they saw him. They decide to trust these strange robots, which does lead to one of the greatest moments in the film.
They literally call themselves Decepticons. That doesn't set off any red flags?
From here, John Cena remains suspicious while everyone else, including the scientist man, trusts the robots and gives them access to US military technology, communication devices, and intel. None of this is strictly bad. It involves some amusing moments and some minor subversions of tropes. But what's the point? John Cena is suspicious of the robots, but then has to learn by the end not to be suspicious of Bumblebee? Like, there's no real vindication here. The story isn't really even saying anything other than, I guess maybe we should have shot those two like we did Bumblebee? It would have made more sense for John Cena to be saved by Bumblebee at the start than be the voice of reason fighting everybody to trust him. That also would have been a little more standard, so I don't know. What they ended up with is a mess, but it has some nice moments. I think the entire thing probably should have been torn out and replaced, but I don't know what with, so I'm going to leave it alone for now. So, what would I have done? Let's get back to the core idea, that of the character arcs for Charlie and Bumblebee. What would I have done had I been given this script? First off, I'd have ditched the diving thing entirely. Like, the whole Mean Girls subplot feels really weak in this story. Charlie is an outsider who likes being an outsider, so why would she care if people are making fun of her? Why would she care if she can't dive in the cliff diving scene? One character I haven't talked about is Memo, the nerdy boy next door who has a crush on Charlie. His arc basically goes nowhere too, but he was there to be a sounding board and for comic relief, so that's okay. He does what he's supposed to do, and he also acts it really well, so neat. I have no big problems with him. But the Mean Girls scene would be much stronger if, in this case, Charlie were helping him. She doesn't care about the Mean Girls. She has a strength there. Or maybe she does care, but shouldn't. He could help her see that there's no real reason to care what people think about her. Or, probably better, she could do the reverse for him. At least then it would have a point. Either way, I'd cut the diving subplot. Instead, I'd lean into the mechanic aspect of her personality, and I'd show that fixating upon her father's car, the one she claims she needs to fix, is becoming an obsession for her, something that is holding her back. Then, I'd blow up the car. Seriously, this car represents her grief in many ways, particularly the harmful way she's hanging on to the grief instead of processing and moving beyond it. If the car got destroyed in a military or evil robot attack, We could see this is super traumatic for her. But then I'd pull a small switch on the viewer. Earlier, before the car is blown up, I'd show her using some of the tricks she learned from her father to help Bumblebee. This is kind of in the film already, with her helping with the radio. But I'd expand it, make good on her mechanical genius, and show that despite the alien machinery she can't really understand, there are little bits that she can apply. She'd highlight one thing in particular. Maybe, this socket really looks like it was connected to something. Then relate it to the car. My father showed me this carburetor needs, carburetor fluid? Okay, I'm not a mechanic. I'd have to call an expert here. But the thematic idea doesn't need specifics. We show that there's a problem with Bumblebee and that she has kind of an idea how to fix it because of something her father taught her. But she's not quite there yet. There's a connection she needs to make. Then, when we blow up the hot rod, she goes on the run. Later on, the military gives Bumblebee to the evil robots, just as it happens in the film, and we show that he can't fight without his programming. We'll have foreshadowed this at least one time before. Then, the robots turn against the humans. But we do this in a slightly different way from the film. First, this should be happening at the climactic location, so Bumblebee doesn't have to drive to get there, which kills a little tension in the actual movie. Second, we should have the humans realize it and John Cena be right and try to fight the evil robots, but they're getting their fleshy biological rear ends handed to them. In the midst of this, a firefight for their lives and the fate of the planet, Charlie fixes Bumblebee. Again, him getting his memories back is the important moment here. After that, him fighting the evil robots is a victory lap. Charlie should use what she's learned from her father, and in so doing accomplish something important. Not just the fixing of an old hot rod, but the repair of a warrior who can save all these people. And maybe I'd let John Cena do something. He was kind of wasted in this film. Him helping out here would be a nice thematic bookend to the fact that at the beginning, he was fighting Bumblebee and caused him to get hurt in the first place. The triumphant moment here would be a real stand up and cheer one if Bumblebee powers up right at the ending, when everyone is getting beaten up. And the real cherry on top is it would be that Charlie's skill did this. Then you can have the cool fight. Sure, maybe even let Charlie climb up the pole to get the mini MacGuffin or whatever, but make her character arc relevant to the film. What happens in the current version is like Han Solo showing up in the epilogue and saying, "Hey guys, I finally got over my greed issues. Did I miss anything? Oh, hey, where's Luke?" Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Again, the point of my essays like this isn't to poke fun at a film that was legitimately enjoyable and did a lot of great things. My goal is to use practical examples from film to show how to improve stories. In this case, I think these revisions would be a better version of what the storytellers were trying to do, but didn't quite pull off. Wonder if the whole diving thing was from an earlier draft of the story. Like, they decided to make Charlie a mechanic in a later draft and just didn't cut the original, weaker character elements? Maybe some producer was like, "No, you can't cut that. That's the one thing I added to the film." Either that, or they added the diving part because the character wasn't feeling like she had enough of an arc and completely missed enhancing the arc they already had instead somehow. But, I mean, how do you put a mechanic in a story about giant robots and not let her fix a giant robot? If I can suggest a takeaway from this, it would be to remember that your character arcs mean something in the story. Also, maybe someday films will start coming out again, and I can stop doing essays on ones that were released 3 years ago. Anyway, thanks for watching, and good luck with your own stories.